asking questions in class, or when girls are questioning material, it's often perceived as being an affront to the authority of the adult in that space, or being combative or defiant in ways that are inconsistent with their true intention. And in some ways, again, given the legacies and misreadings that accompany the behavioral patterns that we see in schools, we also see this way in which this hypersexualization of black girls prevents us from responding to their trauma and victimization, and that's very problematic.
You can watch this and other programs online at booktv.org.
Here's a look at some of the most borrowed books this week from the Nashville Public Library. Topping the list, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. She's followed by the late neurosurgeon Paul Kalanithi, who contemplates his mortality in When Breath Becomes Air. Fox News host Bill O'Reilly and historian Martin Dugard recall America's defeat of Japan during World War II in Killing the Rising Sun. J.D. Vance remembers growing up in and then moving away from the Appalachia region in Hillbilly Elegy. And National Book Award winner Ta-Nehisi Coates gives his thoughts on the current state of Black America in Between the World and Me. Our look at this week's most borrowed books at the Nashville Public Library continues with CNN host Anderson Cooper and his mother Gloria Vanderbilt's dual memoir, The Rainbow Comes and Goes. That's followed by Dave Ramsey's The Total Money Makeover, where he provides tips how to manage money and alleviate debt. And Eat, Pray, Love author Elizabeth Gilbert's latest, Big Magic. The list concludes with Congressman John Lewis's remembrance of the Civil Rights Movement March, the first installment of a 3-part graphic novel series. That's a look at some of the most recently borrowed books from the Nashville Public Library. Be sure to tune in Book TV's coverage of the Nashville Southern Festival of Books all this weekend.
So much of the town revenue now comes from stopping and arresting its citizens. 20,000 people are in Ferguson, 16,000 of them have warrants. I mean, it's a stunning number. Can you imagine 20,000 people and 16,000 of them having warrants? That's the town business. So when Mike Brown gets stopped, it wasn't because he stole something out of a store. In fact, that wasn't even an issue at the time of the stop. He was stopped for jaywalking. These are the types of offenses people are stopped for, particularly black people in Ferguson. And so between that and public housing, Pruitt-Igoe collapsing in St. Louis, a kind of failed experiment by any measure, liberal and conservative. All of those things led people to go to Ferguson, led people to see what happened to what happened to Mike Brown. And so to some extent, the story of Mike Brown was a much deeper story than the story of a particular act of state violence. And then as I was going to write the proposal and send it out, we were back in New York, and Eric Garner, who had been killed by, or I should say Daniel Pantaleo. We often don't talk about the police who do this, we talk about the victims. But Daniel Pantaleo, who killed Eric Garner, was not indicted. And we were marching in the streets. And we're back in Ferguson right before that because of the non-indictment of Darren Wilson. And before we knew it, we went on this sort of tour over the next year of really high-profile cases of state violence. Eric Garner, Mike Brown, Walter Scott, who was shot in the back running away in Charleston, Sandra Bland, who was found hanging from a jail cell in Hempstead, Texas, Freddie Gray, who was beaten because he had the audacity to look a cop in the eye, which is why they chased him, which is why he ran, et cetera, et cetera. And so in each of these cases, my book tries to get underneath that. In the case of Mike Brown, it was public housing and joblessness. In the case of Freddie Gray, it was about the prosecutor's office and the historically unprecedented amount of power prosecutors have, and the way in which public defenders have been sort of disempowered, and the public itself has come under assault. You know, in the case of Sandra Bland, it's about the way that black women and girls are criminalized in their interactions with police, but also how mental illness itself is criminalized. And I'm going down the list in each of those cases to get a deeper issue of nobodiness and disposability that I think is partly about racism. It's largely indebted to the legacy of white supremacy, but we can't at any moment ignore the fact that all of these things exist within the context of a neoliberal moment where the market becomes our ultimate measure of goodness. A market becomes our ultimate decider. A market becomes the ultimate court of appeal to adjudicate competing worldviews. The market becomes privatization, deregulation, austerity. These become the kind of buzzwords that we use that have become common sense. And so as long as we live in the context of a class-defending state, we're going to have these other things going on. And so my book is undergirded by that assumption, but it's really digging at each of these cases to give us a bigger story of what it means to be nobody in 21st century America.
You can watch this and other programs online at booktv.org.
And you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2, live coverage of the Southern Festival of Books in downtown Nashville.